All right, so this is a suggestion via Patreon. The name of the video is Piers Morgan versus Coleman Hughes. I don't see myself as any race traitor. I have no idea who this guy is, so let's see what you guys want me to see. Let's jump into it.
Coleman Hughes is one of the world's most incisive new commentators on racial politics, but not everybody likes what he has to say. He argues that America should still dream of being colorblind.
If you care about fighting racism, embrace colorblindness.
Nah, we talk about. Listen, I see that person over there looks visually different from me, right? I don't care that that person is visually different than me. Right. But I know that person's experiences are slightly different than mine or slightly different from that other person's, etc. Right. Everyone has their own perception of reality. Right? They all go through different things, and some of it is based off of how they appear to the public. Colorblindness is absolutely ridiculous, the concept of it. By disregarding someone's the color of their skin, you're disregarding everything that they may or may not go through.
Support class-based policies. Create colorblind processes in your own world.
Just as Martin Luther King did. So why do the critics say he's radical, even racist?
I mean, there's a certain group of people who like King or respect him. Don't get me wrong, King was decent, but was he? I don't know. But all right, let's go.
Coleman Hughes is
there were so many other better people than King at the time.
here, and he's uncensored.
All right, let's go.
Coleman, great to have you on Uncensored. Let's get to that first question. Why do people think you're a racist?
Well, where'd that come from?
Well, there's been a very effective campaign against the concept of colorblindness going back 50 years, but particularly in the last 10. Obviously, if you actually look at the historical record, the most important anti-slavery activists from the Civil War on through the Civil Rights Movement were committed to the idea that race doesn't matter, that race has no place in American law, and that in Martin Luther King's case, as he spelled out in his book, Why We Can't Wait, that the way we should address the legacy of slavery and racial inequality is through class-based anti-poverty programs that benefit the black poor and white poor alike.
That's fair. I never understood how impoverished people, deeply melanated people, black people, right, and deeply impoverished people of European descent, white people, right, didn't come together. I don't understand. I mean, I get it. I mean, Bacon's Rebellion, right, but there needs to be some type of unity there because they're the closest. What matters more consistently is your tax rate, bro. All right. If you guys if you're in the same tax bracket, you have more alike than you actually think.
Now, that's my philosophy. The problem is there was an academic movement called critical race theory in the 80s and 90s that defined itself in opposition to the colorblind principle, that said the civil rights movement did not go far enough and that race has to be put on the front burner. American society is inherently racist, and the only way to do that is to center race in our own psychology and in public policy. And unfortunately, too many people have fallen for the myth that color blindness is naive at best or racist at worst. And I'll say one more thing about this. I think defenders of colorblindness, who I agree with, have given critics too easy a target by trotting out this line, I don't see color. Obviously, we see color, right? We see race. We're all capable of being racially biased. So I think that's given critics too easy a target. We should ditch that phrase and say what we really mean, which is, I try to treat people without regard to their race, and I want to see that enshrined in public policy as well.
That's fair.
That
point right there.
It's fascinating, the kickback that you face, because I watched you on Bill Maher last week and thought you just made so much sense. And you weren't being inflammatory, you weren't using incendiary rhetoric. You were just basically going back to what Martin Luther King said. You want people to be judged by the content of their character and not the color of their skin.
Absolutely. I mean, there's in particular in elite institutions, and this is why I face some problems giving my TED Talk, elite institutions in particular have really lost themselves to this ideology that treats colorblindness as somehow akin to fascism almost. They've also come under the rhetoric of kind of safetyism, so that certain people will say that I've made them feel unsafe. Now, I don't know how you and your audience experience me right now, but I'm a pretty mild-mannered person.
I feel pretty
I'm
safe,
not a
Coleman. I got to be
flamethrower.
honest with you. I don't feel under
Yeah.
immediate threat.
Good, I'm glad. And so I try to have conversations with people, and I'm trying to, the truth is, outside of elite spaces, the kinds of arguments I make are almost boring to people because they're such common sense. And I think it spells out the difference between elites and everyone else, that the kinds of things I'm saying are experienced in certain elite spaces as harmful.
This is how I'm seeing it, okay? If you use very specific buzzwords, right, you're going to rub people wrong instantly. Like specifically, if they're spoken about as being terrible, but then you consistently use the same terminology, everyone is going to instantly think you're talking about one very specific thing. The thing about it is, I'm hearing him speak, and he's fine, right? He's fine. There are no issues here, right? Everything he's saying is absolutely coherent, makes sense, right? But it's how it's if you use very specific buzzwords, you cannot be shocked that people are now conflating the conversation, right? You're using all the words, and everyone is following, the overall, the general talking points regarding those very specific words, right? I was waiting for you to say, I don't care if you're blue, black, or polka dot. I've never seen a polka dot person in my life, right? And that's the general consensus here. If you're using these words, people's minds are gonna instantly go to the nonsense talking points of polka dot people and things.
There's been this huge debate about diversity, equity and inclusion, DEI hiring, a big public clash between Elon Musk and Mark Cuban. Musk claiming that DEI was just another word for racism. This followed the resignation of Harvard's first black president, Claudine Gay. But Mark Cuban hit back and said, by extending our hiring search to include them, we find that people are more qualified. The loss of DEI-phobic companies is my gain. What did you make of that debate?
They actually both made true points. So the benign version of DEI, what you might call the older version of DEI, is exactly what Mark Cuban said. It's, I'm hiring for a position. I'm going to cast the net a little wider than I might otherwise do to make sure that I'm including in my search candidates that might not otherwise be included just by looking at my immediate network, right? That's actually really what was meant by affirmative action when the concept first came out in the 60s. Now that morphed into a very different concept, which is I'm going to abandon merit and make sure that this particular position is filled by a person of color, right? So,
okay, that's when things get a little weird, right? I get it, include, but like the best person should get the job kind of regardless. But
if we're talking about the older benign version of DEI that preserves the merit principle, I'm all for that. The problem is that DEI, as it generally operates increasingly, and certainly in a post-2020 world, is more and more the second thing. It is making sure that my company has a certain number, essentially, or if not a specific quota, then a vague goal of having this many people of color, this many women, etc. And that is a violation of the merit principle. Now, part of the reason that people that we're so confused about this is because American law is actually very confusing. And this is one thing that came up in their debate where they both have good points. The letter
okay, guys, I need to see this debate.
Of civil rights law is colorblind. And that was absolutely the intent of the Civil Rights Act, was never to make someone hire on the basis of race in any direction. But over the decades, judges and executive orders have interpreted those laws to de facto require employees to consider and take race into account, or else be vulnerable to disparate impact lawsuits. So truthfully, America is in the legal regime is in a schizophrenic state right now. And I think that we ought to go back to the old benign version of DEI that Mark Cuban is saying he supports and actually make that the reality rather than the toxic version.
Do you know what it
that
reminds?
All right, bro, listen, if you're saying that the old benign version of DEI was affirmative action, I get it, bro, right? But affirmative action really had nothing to do with specifically people of color, right? Or any deeply melanated individual in the United States of America. The majority of people who took advantage of affirmative action are white women. So, all right.
is the norm right
It
now.
reminds me, Coleman, of the woke debate. If you go back to the 60s when the word woke first started being used, actually predominantly in African American music, it was intended to just mean a raised awareness of social and racial injustice, to which everybody would sign up to pretty much. But what it's become a form of fascism of the like that people who say they're woke profess to detest.
Okay, I want to kind of rebut him really quickly. I just spoke about this, I think yesterday or the day before. You guys sent me a video about like woke people going crazy in public for 9 minutes, something like that. And I just explained, I don't understand the word woke because my definition of woke from like the late 90s, early 2000s had nothing to do with what you're calling woke now. That's not woke. That's something different, right? We need another name for whatever that is, but everyone calls it woke now. So I guess we've decided that is called woke now, guys, right? But that has never been that in my head, at least. That's just craziness. People screaming at the top of their lungs for no reason because they can't actually come up with something coherent to say. That's a little wild.
The like that people who say they're woke profess to detest.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's become something. It's become speech codes. It's become the death of due process. It's become cancel culture, and so forth. The truth is, we have all of these terms, right? Wokeness, CRT, DEI, social justice. All of these terms have operated on rotation in the national conversation in the past 10 years. But, fundamentally, what I try to do in my book is cut past all of these terms that we argue about and talk about the underlying philosophy. The underlying philosophy ought to be that, Piers, I can see you're a white person, you can see that I'm not. But at the end of the day, and racism is possible, racism exists. But at the end of the day, the goal has to be that I'm judging you based on who you are as Piers Morgan, and you're judging me based on who I am as Coleman Hughes.
Right.
But I personally have lived my life like this forever, being that I live on multiple continents, right? So I'm around people who literally don't look like me all day long, and the only thing that matters literally is the person's overall the characteristics, right? Like exactly who that person is deeply internally. That's the only thing that matters to me, generally. But my experience is not everyone else's experience. I'm sure there are some other people who just base everything off the color of someone's skin, and that's what he's pointing out. But if this is the new updated version of colorblindness, because again, the whole concept of colorblindness has been ridiculous for many, many years, right? I mean, it's keywords, buzzwords. But if he's trying to now change the definition to something different, and if this is the definition, all right, I like it.
And we want to raise the next generation of kids to understand that is the only appropriate attitude to have towards racial identity, not this philosophy which says you and I can't understand each other because we're of different races.
There was an interesting moment actually on Bill Maher's show this week, and this followed the shooting at the Kansas City Super Bowl parade. And we know that two teenagers were charged over the shooting, but very little other detail was given about them, including their skin color. And Ann Coulter, the conservative commentator, said this.
If it were a white man shooting...
Oh, no. I haven't seen this person on TV in forever. I thought we escaped this individual. She's back. I have to listen to her voice.
We'd know. Remember the crazy terrorist Muslims? That's when I first noticed, they're not telling us who it is. It's not a white male. The longer they go without telling you, it's not a white male.
What did you think of that?
I almost don't care whatever she just said. I'm sorry. It is what it is, guys. I'm biased, I guess, against her specifically. I'm not really a fan of her. at all.
So I saw the Associated Press report that the reason we don't know anything about the identity of the subjects in this case is because Missouri law is very strict around juvenile suspects. So I have no reason to disbelieve that. If Associated Press is right, then Ann Coulter is wrong in this case. So, but
Clap it up.
Stepping back.
Clap it up for Ann Coulter just being wrong.
I think her general point is true about how the media reports stories differently based on the race of the perpetrators and the race of the victims. So I can give you two quick examples.
There's a reason for that, though, I'm sure, 100%. And most likely, I'm going to say the reason is because of the history of it, I'm sure, right? The constant plastering in the 70s and 80s and 60s, 50s and 40s and 30s and 20s of anytime anytime anything happens regarding someone who is deeply melanated, it being put on front page. There's probably a reason for that, bro. Does that make it better now? Not really, right? But there is a literal history in the United States of America and Western world of just plastering that. Have you seen any like movie in the 90s, late 90s, early 90s, guys? I mean, there were issues here, okay, with the depiction of deeply melanated people on constantly front page news. That's why.
One was the Kyle Rittenhouse case, where a lot of people didn't know from the reporting that the people he shot, the 3 people he shot, the 2 people he killed, were all white, because articles would just omit that. They would include that Kyle Rittenhouse, comma, a white man, and then they would just list the names of the people he killed, where you'd be pretty sure that if he had shot Black people, that would be front and center in the article. And the second from memory was the case of Jasmine Barnes, which was a young girl that was tragically killed while sitting in her car. And it was initially thought to be a white man that had killed her. And as a result, it had wall-to-wall media coverage for about a week, until the authorities realized, actually it was just another gang shooting where she was caught in the crossfire, and the perpetrator was a young Black man, and all of a sudden, no one cared about the story anymore.
Titles matter, okay? Like specifically in news, I'm not standing up for this because that's just, unfortunately, that's just what happens in news media, right? If the title or the thumbnail or like mainly the title, right? Because it's SEO, right? So like if people want to see something, it's going to end up being something similar to this person that looks like this did this to this person who looks like this. That's just generally what gets all the clicks, guys, right? Like I think this video is probably going to do well just because of the title of the video that I'm reacting to. So because it's rooted in this, it always does this for some reason.
I think there is certainly a deeper truth to what Ann Coulter is saying, even if she is not right about this specific story.
Even if she is Ann Coulter?
I think you've been quoted as saying that white victims of police brutality don't make news. And I think to a large extent that is true.
At the same rate, yeah, you're right.
The issue of racial bias in police shootings, for example, there's a clip from a Harvard professor, Roland Frier, and he spoke about his study, which academics told him not to publish, when he said he didn't find any racial bias in police shootings. Let's take a look.
We didn't find any racial bias in police shootings. Now, that was really surprising to me because I expected to see it. I had 8 full-time RAs that it took to do this over nearly a year. When I found this surprising result, I hired 8 fresh ones and redid it. They came up with the same exact answer, and I thought it was robust. And I went to go give it, and my God, all hell broke loose. I had colleagues take me to the side and say, "Don't publish this. You'll ruin your career."
I mean, fascinating.
Yeah, you're breaking the narrative.
Harvard, again, it all comes back to Harvard. I don't know what the hell's been going on at that place, but fascinating. This guy, as he said, he went to painstaking lengths to check and double check the research. and reached a conclusion that just wasn't popular, and therefore he had to be attacked.
Absolutely. I mean, Roland would certainly want me to mention that paper found two things. It found that there was a racial difference in a black person's likelihood of being roughed up, essentially, pushed against a police car, say. But there was no racial difference, in fact, a small racial difference in the opposite direction in terms of a black person's likelihood of being shot. Now, a lot of research has found that, but because of the hysteria and the culture of the conversation around police shootings during the Black Lives Matter era and the George Floyd era, those kinds of findings could not get a fair hearing in the public conversation, even if you have...
He's right. He's right. Like, if that information is 100% accurate, I'm going to thoroughly research it, guys. Right? But if that information is 100% accurate, then yeah, it's not going to work. It won't work. Like, I'm telling you right now. I mean, unfortunately, the news media, that doesn't help anyone, if that makes any sense, right? It doesn't line the pockets of the people that are reporting them. It doesn't change the narrative. Oh no, unfortunately, it does change the narrative in a way that's not really, conducive to the pockets of the CEO.
An extremely accomplished black Harvard economist saying it, and that shows something is really broken in our conversation around racial inequality.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Right.
What do you think of the wider debate that goes on in which we constantly seek to rewrite history? Whether it's knocking down statues of people in Britain who had once employed slaves, but maybe also did amazing work in revitalizing and rebuilding whole cities with schools and hospitals and so on. Thinking of Colston in Bristol. Or you're talking about people wanting to take down, statues of great American presidents because they too had a dodgy history of slave ownership.
I'm a weird one here, guys, right? I will never give redemption. I don't care about the time. I don't care about the person. I don't care what you did. You owned a person. You're done to me, bro. I know that's going to sound crazy. I don't know why it does, but there are going to be people in the comments screaming at me, top of the lungs, right? But here's the thing. I don't give redemption to slave owners. I don't. I don't care who did it at all. Doesn't matter. I don't care that the ancient kingdom of Dahomey in West Africa were capturing fallen villages and selling these people to the Europeans to then sell to the Americas. I don't care about that. They're terrible also, right? Just keep this in mind. You sell a human being as property, there's no redemption for you or your. I mean, like if you benefited from it. Not much redemption.
And then the issue that comes off the back of that about reparations for people today whose ancestors were slaves or were treated badly. And I want to play a clip from the MSNBC presenter Joy Reid here, where she talks about her own personal demand.
Barack Obama's 2 terms as president are your reparations. And Juneteenth, which you already celebrated anyway, is your reparations. And yet, you built this country. You literally physically built this country, and yet the attitude toward you from a lot of your peers and your fellow citizens is just shut up and be grateful.
Ooh. Reparations is another interesting topic, bro. All of what you said is absolutely factual. I don't understand Barack Obama being reparations. That's wild, right? All of what she said is absolutely factual, but it's not plausible, like any longer, as in. Like if we would have had this conversation, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, about reparations, about 100 years ago, that would have been one thing. But now, it's too late. I understand there were a whole lot of families that were able to basically come up off of something relating to it, right? I get it. The GI Bill, up until, maybe the last 75 years didn't do anything for your family, even though there were black people fighting in like the military and were never able to actually utilize the GI Bill to actually get a leg up. I get that. You want to have all these conversations. I know all of the conversations around it. It's too late. It's too late. right? I understand it. I completely understand, but it's just not worth it anymore, bro. Like, look at where we are right now. Like, how much money do you think your family needs to, I don't know, feel better, right? Bro, do you see our national debt? What can we do about that? I mean, I get it. There's no money. There's no money to fix these areas that are stuck in like urban blight. I get that, but yet we have money to fund, migrants and Ukraine. I don't. But you get what I'm saying here, right? The concept of reparations could have worked a long time ago, even though the attitudes were absolutely wild and it would have never happened. You just have to, everyone in America that was affected by it in any way just has to unfortunately move on. There's nothing that can happen, right? Like, if you actually pay any of the descendants of that in the United States of America, they will have to print money, okay? And the last thing we need right now is to print more money. Inflation? Bro, that most likely it'll be probably in the millions to everyone, right? But the problem with that is inflation is already crazy. Imagine what inflation would look like after that. All right, that money you got is gonna wreck the country. Okay, but all right.
Your response, Coleman.
If you want to pay reparations to people like my grandparents who are alive, who grew up under segregation and Jim Crow,
that's where it has to stop, right there. Because people are like, oh, there's no one alive that was part of slavery. Yeah, I know that. But did you not understand Jim Crow existed also? Right? Because they're still alive. They can have full conversations about this. Just because it ended on paper, it didn't end. Bro,
by all means do so. And you can call it reparations, you can call it damages. They're doing this outside of Chicago to living victims, okay? Living people that can show that they were harmed by racist policies before the end of Jim Crow. There is no precedent in American history for paying reparations for instance, to me, because of slavery, which ended in 1865. Freed slaves should have been paid reparations at the time. That's one of the great injustices of American history. That doesn't mean that we should be paying people for things that happened to their sixth greats grandparents. Now, the problem with this attempt to rewrite history is that it's so clearly based on a kind of narrow and frankly self-hating worldview among Americans. The fact is that slavery was practiced on every inhabited continent, in basically every society for thousands and thousands of years.
Yeah, I was hoping he didn't pull a PragerU on me, bro. He is in fact doing that. He's right. Okay, it has absolutely been used everywhere around the world. But if you want to conflate chattel slavery to any of these other slaveries, are you picking and choosing what you want to talk about in history? You don't want to change history, but you sure are picking the perfect lines. You get what I'm saying here, guys? But you know what? Listen. Let's let them cook, guys.
In basically every society for thousands and thousands of years, and only in the past 300 or 400 years did countries bit by bit and one by one begin to outlaw it. America, as a country that was founded on the principle of freedom, had a contradiction and a kind of hypocrisy that other countries didn't have, because other countries didn't even pretend or profess freedom, right? So people hold that against America, the fact that there was hypocrisy here.
That's not the case. What's being held against is the fact that families were separated, kids were sold, and you could actually be born into slavery. That's the difference here. For some reason, he's not calling this out. There's a big difference that for some reason people run away from. Right? The difference literally is being born into slavery versus your father's a slave, right? You have a kid. That kid is free. What does that kid have to do with the purchase you made of that human, right? That kid can then grow up to be whatever he want to do to buy the father out of slavery. There's a slight difference. We can go back to the Ottomans if you want. Okay, we can go back to the Romans if you want. How far do you want to go back, right? And for some reason, he's pulling a PragerU, basically pulling 30% truths out of the situation, only speaking on those slight truths, guys, but missing the point.
I very much view it the opposite. I would say between the old world where slavery was legal everywhere and the new world where we've banned it, everywhere on earth, there was bound.
Bro, slavery is right now happening in Mauritania and Libya right now. Open air slave markets.
To be a moment of awkward transition and hypocrisy in a country like America. That doesn't mean America is worse than the rest of the world. In fact, I think it makes it better in some way.
Just finally, your book, Colorblindness, The Arguments for a Colorblind America, an end of race politics, which I think is a lovely aspiration, but not happening anytime soon by the look of it. But what reaction have you had from other Black Americans since
it's been terrible.
You've gone on your publicity tour and people have heard you explain your position?
It's been terrible. Trust that.
The reaction from Black Americans has been as varied as the reaction from white Americans. The only difference is, in many cases, the Black people that support my message don't always want to do so publicly because there is a penalty paid in the Black community if you are perceived as any kind of race traitor or so forth.
I'm pretty sure I'm saying publicly, I like what he's been saying, most of it. Just don't get into the conspiracy. He was really good without the concept of rewriting history, specifically his example of rewriting history. He was good up until then. He just started talking craziness, guys.
I don't see myself as any kind of race traitor. In fact,
no, you're fine.
There are certain things that have hurt the Black community that it's only people like me that talk about. For instance, in 2020, America experienced the greatest increase in the homicide rate year over year in 100 years. That's according to the Pew Research Center. And that effect was concentrated in the Black community. To me, there's nothing more of a betrayal than to not talk about things that harm the community because they are not.
I'm guessing he's right wing, yes?
In vogue. So I don't view myself as any kind of race traitor, and though certain loud voices in the Black community would accuse me of that.
Coleman,
I'm not accusing you of nothing. I wouldn't say I'm part of any type of community because I exist in my studio, right? But I can only imagine that the amount of Black people that just strongly dislike every single word that comes out of his mouth is absolutely crazy. I'm telling you, he's being nice. I think he's being nice, and he's saying, you know what? Listen, this is about equal. No, it's not. You know, it's not. I know. You know, it's not.
Hughes, fascinating to talk to you. What a breath of fresh air you are to a very toxic debate that's not going away anytime soon. I hope people read your book. I really do. It's been great to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Right, like I'm definitely gonna check out his book. I mean, I have no problem with that. I like soaking in information from all over the place, all types of sources. I think it's solid. If we can get away from the fact that the concept of the color of your skin really doesn't mean much, but it's all about the similarities you actually have, and a lot of it's based off of your economics. I mean, yeah. If we can get to that, like, hey, listen, this is a cool guy. I like this guy. He looks different to me, but I like this guy, right? I live by that mantra anyway. So I guess I exist in a realm of colorblindness. But that's, I travel a lot, guys. So of course I have to kind of get used to the concept of colorblindness. I guess it came natural, right? But if that's the idea, I love it. That's it. But all right, listen, you guys all have an absolutely amazing day. Enjoy your day thoroughly. Guys, before we go, are you guys subscribed to the other channels? Logical Movie Reviews with Mr. L. Boyd along with Mr. L. Boyd Music. Both are found in the description. Check it out.